briefing at Connected Places Catapult. My name is Sam Markey. I'm the Director of Strategic Analysis, and it's great to have you here. We'll just give a couple of minutes for any stragglers to join, and then we will crack on. We've got lots of people signed up to attend, and we've got some fantastic speakers. I think it's going to be a really interesting session. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, your questions, your experience. So please be ready to ask questions using the Q&A. We're also on YouTube this morning, so if you're struggling for any reason on Zoom, then you can skip over to our YouTube channel and stream from there. Well, I think my clock is 1 minute past, so we'll make a start. So as I say, thank you all for coming. Great to have you. This is one of our series of webinars at the Catapult. We exist to bring the market together around opportunities in placemaking, innovation, in mobility and the built environment. And this is an opportunity to talk about one of the key things we focus on, how you buy innovation. There's lots of great products and services out there in the market, but sometimes buying them and putting them into action is the greatest barrier, the greatest hurdle. So we're working on tackling that and working with you. So if my colleagues can skip on to the next slide. I'd flag that I noticed that I've put a hashtag on. I don't know if anyone out there is tweeting, but if you are, you can use the challenging procurement hashtag, and you'll find lots of other content already out there on that hashtag. Do share some of your thoughts on there, as well as on the Q&A in the app here. So I wanted to start with a couple of questions about who you are out there in the audience. So my colleague, I think, is going to flash up some quick questions. That's right, here we are. So hands up if this is your first time attending something at Connected Places Catapult. Give us a sense of which industry you're in. We love bringing people together from across different parts of the market, as I say, from local government, regional government, central government, elsewhere in the public sector, large businesses, small businesses, and research community, from the third sector and elsewhere. And likewise, you know, what describes you? Who do we have in the room? And we will do, obviously, traditionally at events, we'd stick our hands up and I'd encourage you to catch up with each other afterwards. We can't do that in this format, but we are working on ways to help you connect to other people. So this is a great way to find out who's who and who's there. So we've got another 5 seconds. If you haven't ticked those 3 boxes. Oh, very good. Great, so we've got lots of new people, so it's great to connect with you. I'm going to explain in a second a bit more about what on earth Connected Places Catapult is and what we're here for. A great range of different parts of the market represented, lots of SMEs, but also people from research and from central government, local government. If you've put something else, stick it in the questions and let me know which sector or segment of the market I've forgotten on my survey. And lots of you in management and again in the other categories. So send us the things to tell us who you are that we've forgotten. Very good. That's really helpful to get a sense of who's in the room. As I say, we will look at how we can use that data afterwards. Great. So if we go back to the screen, colleagues who are managing the PowerPoint, lovely. So. The Connected Places Catapult is part of the Catapult family. There are 9 centres with locations all the way across the UK, working to help grow the UK economy, help boost innovation and productivity. And we work specifically in the built environment and mobility sector, the place sector. And we describe that across these 6 domains: the decision-making in institutions, the built environment, mobility, public realm, well-being, and critical infrastructure. So if any innovation in that space, we are interested in working to support and scale. And we do that through 3 ways. We partner with places to boost demand for innovative solutions at scale, to unlock both economic and environmental benefits for places, and of course, commercial opportunities for firms. We work with businesses large and small and research institutions to increase the supply of proven products and services that meet market demand. We want to make sure that you're developing products and services for which there's a customer and help you get them sold and scaled. And we invest in disrupting poorly performing markets to create new commercial opportunities. And we do that by bringing together research institutions, strategic analysts, innovators, and pioneers of place to look at parts of the market which perhaps are overdue for reformation and creativity. So that's broadly what we do. And we invest a lot of our time in trying to dismantle barriers and things that hold the market back from achieving its full success. And as I say, procurement is one of those that regularly comes up when we ask people, you know, what's the biggest problem? What's holding you back? So we've dedicated some of our work to focus on that and how we can understand the problem and articulate it and start to dismantle it. So today's session is part of work we've been doing called the Challenging Procurement Initiative. You can read some blogs and thought pieces and research that we've put out on Medium. We'll share links out afterwards. We published a report in the last few days summarising some of our learnings and the global practice. And the author of that report, Malcolm, is going to be our first speaker. So if you go on to the next slide. Very good. This is the sort of flow for the next hour. So that's me at the top. Malcolm is going to speak first. Malcolm's a former MEP. He's the chair of the Local Government Association Task Force on Innovation and Procurement. He is an expert in the field and an advocate for better use of the tools that exist. And so is going to share what he's learned. Ollie, one of our in-house experts, is going to share a bit more about some of the work he's been doing with large buyers and what that's proven at the coalface. And then we're delighted to be joined by Matthew from the OECD, who's going to share some of their recent analysis across the wider global picture. So hopefully really interesting. They're each going to keep their comments relatively short and sweet. We're going to leave lots of time for you to ask questions. So, as I say, ask questions as we go. We'll gather them up at the end. And I think with that, I will hand over to Malcolm.
Well, thanks very much, Sam, and good morning, everybody. And it's great to be with you. This is the first time that I've done a seminar. I have to say it's perhaps slightly less daunting than my maiden speech in the European Parliament, which was a rather bigger space. But I hope that this will be the first of many opportunities we get to exchange views with you about this really challenging subject. So if we can move on to my slides, first of all. So Oliver and myself are going to cover some points in the report. I'm working like the European Parliament. I have a speaking time of 8 minutes, so I'm going to make the most of it. And so we hope you've had a chance to read it, and I just want to make some highlights. But from my perspective, the whole role of the public sector in investing and driving innovation using public procurement as a really valuable tool is something that I've been working on for many years. I recently turned up my first report, which I did for the European Parliament back in 2007. It was agreed in 2008. And that's how long I've been convinced about this. But we're still making relatively slow progress. And I think that integrating procurement into our whole thinking about innovation is really what we want to do. Now, the really, I think, exciting thing, if I can call it that, even though we are in a crisis which is affecting all of us, but nevertheless, we are seeing, I think, an unleashing a bit more freedom of thinking about how the public sector as a customer can really drive radical innovation. And I think that's going to be absolutely indispensable in solving the challenges that were already there before we moved into this crisis and what's following on. And I was pleased that the Prime Minister, in his closing statement on Sunday, mentioned the importance about innovation in the post-COVID economy. And that's really what we want to engage you with in this whole discussion, because this is something that is a global movement. And you'll see I put a box at the top there called Declare to Innovate. And, you know, there's a good strapline there, because big challenges demand new thinking. Well, that's the headline for an international declaration that was pulled together by the OECD, who we're going to hear from later. We need to thank them for doing that. And almost a year ago, the UK government signed up to a declaration to embed innovation in the public sector. And what that means is that that was a commitment for the public sector to embrace and enhance innovation. And that term enhancement is really important. And also encourage and equip public servants to be able to carry out that innovation and work in partnership with other people, and particularly obviously the supply community, for doing that. And so I think the crucial lesson that's come through it and it is headlined in our report is that procurement is an absolutely crucial tool in doing this, and we're not really exploiting it enough. And that's because procurement doesn't just deliver better solutions if you engage innovators in developing those solutions from the beginning, and you widen your approach to the people you want to supply innovations and get those ideas in. But it also encourages a whole bottom-up movement for innovation as well. Because we know from our work, and this is the work I've done with local government and others, that actually innovative organizations have really innovative leaders who encourage everyone in their organization to come up with ideas and are prepared to push them through. And that may mean taking risks, but it's all about risks in the end, but it's how you manage those risks and how you engage people and how you get ideas together and how you define your problems. You see, I think we don't think enough about actually thinking about the problems that we need to solve when we're developing our procurement contracts, and actually getting potential suppliers to partner with us to design and develop those solutions. And if we do that, we not only make our organizations more innovative, but we're actually going to nurture innovative organizations across the economy. That was the key word in that declaration. Public sector organizations have got to enhance the innovative economy by nurturing those innovative organizations. And there are so many examples of procurements where SMEs particularly, and I'm pleased there are so many SMEs listening to this, are actually exploiting that freedom to innovate, which we now show on this slide. So why have we got this freedom? Well, because we've argued consistently in our work that legislation has not inhibited innovative responses. Too many times I hear, well, we can't employ that solution because the legislation won't allow it. Well, I was involved in drafting the current legislation, and I can tell you that's not the case. And I put a little snippet at the top of this slide, which you may not be able to read in detail, but just to show you an extract from an official documentation from the European Union's procurement people. And what they say there is that public buyers may use innovative digital tools. And as an example, you can launch hackathons for new concepts. When did you last see a public sector document encouraging you to use hackathons? That's where we are at the moment. The legislators, I can tell you, are frustrated that not enough people are using the freedom we've given them. So we need more awareness of those innovation processes. We need to build on the openness of COVID and look at the sort of projects. And I know Oliver will also talk about this later, but I'm very interested in what's happened with the ventilator challenge because I'm an engineer. I mean, my background is not in public service. I was involved in designing and developing new cars. And I think we need to look at the fantastic success that we are having in many areas of digital government procurement. I mean, GDS is a beacon organization in this respect. And if we're talking about openness and innovation, look at what we've done in deploying very fast those digital solutions. Successful systems to deal with furloughing employees and getting funds for that. What we've done with websites, all those other things. And read some of the GDS blogs, they're really interesting. And we need to think about engaging citizens in this because they're ones who are ready to contribute ideas. Innovative procurement is a really fantastic way to generate those innovative ideas and also to accelerate the whole of our decision making. In business, and I came from a business background where people always say time is money. Actually getting innovations into operation quickly is something we need to think about. And the striking thing about the ventilator challenge is how partners have been brought together. And this was done by our fellow Catapult, the Advanced Manufacturing Catapult, brought together a series of partners to bring together a whole team of people to get a product into production really quickly and actually to help people. Well, now we need to accelerate our deployment of solutions to help people in the economy generally. And actually having a procurement that consults people, that actually develops new solutions, won't end to end take any longer than in a traditional way of doing things. You take a long time to make a decision, you put some contract out, you get some people in, you're not satisfied with the solutions, you go back and redo it again. So exploiting the freedom to innovate is really important. So I just want to leave you with this thought on my next slide, which will come up now. And I unashamedly cribbed this from a webinar I watched with the OECD this week, and it came from one of our Danish colleagues who's working in limited procurement. So if she finds out about it, thank you very much for this. And what really I want to leave you with this thought. These are three things that we're all thinking about, and public sector organizations in particular, about the things that, will it go back to normal? Can we keep some of the new things we did, or is there a window of opportunity? And so we've got this really great polling system. So we're going to put up that question for you now. And we'd like you to just tell us what you think about it. And I think if we have time that Sam will ask you at the end, because we want to know whether we've changed your mind. So please submit those ideas. Please work with us in the future. And I look forward to your questions later. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Malcolm. Well, there you are. You've heard it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. The people who wrote the legislation that we're all using and wrestling with are giving us permission to use the full suite of tools to be creative in buying innovation. And I'm sure you'll be interested in asking more questions later on. Quick look at the results. That poll looks like we are a just slight majority, anticipating long-lasting sustained change. That's very positive. Another good slug of you anticipating moderate changes, and just a couple expecting things to ping back to normal. That's very interesting. Well, as I say, Malcolm said, we'll look at that. Another of our associates wrote a blog recently on our main Medium site about this very question. Will this change last across the wider part of the market? So if this is a question that interests you, do go and have a look at Richard's piece on that. Excellent. So Malcolm has kind of set the broad scene, the kind of legislative framework, the rules, and we'll explore some of that in more detail. And then Oliver from my team is going to dig into some of the detail a bit more and give some practical examples. So Oliver, let me hand over to you.
Hi everybody. I work in Sam's team and our strategic analysis team, and yeah, I'll talk through just a shade more detail than Malcolm. So Malcolm's talk and Sam's talked brilliantly about the overarching motivation for this program of work and where we think we can go with it with regard to market making and creating new opportunities for vendors to sell innovation. But I think in many cases, a lot of the difficulty in engaging in this area is down to the complexity, and with that complexity comes a tension between the different needs of different parts of organizations and so forth. So really understanding a bit of that is important to understanding how we can embed change and create a legacy for this. So just looking as an example, so if we go to the next slide, as an example of this, so on the left you can see there's an enormous number of innovations that I think that we probably have all seen elements of. You know, there's contract tracing apps for the NHS, there are trials for fever detection, which is going to be increasingly important as people start using public spaces again, and many, many others. And a pretty prominent example of that is the ventilator challenge, where the government was looking for new solutions to mechanical ventilation. And that challenge put out by the government received an awful lot of interest from across the whole of the engineering communities, from small organizations, large, and there was a real variety of approaches across, I think there were 14 consortia in the end. Some of them starting completely from scratch and hacking together solutions, and some of them building on their existing products and how to operationalize faster build of that. And I think it was really interesting to see how that rapid cycle of procurement, development, certification and deployment is applicable into hardware as well as software, where I think perhaps people are a little more familiar with these and that were more comfortable with these types of approaches. But another interesting take home from that, which relates to a lot of the procurement events that go into innovation procurement, are about how the rapidly changing environment since the launch of that competition has shaped things. So the fact that social distancing has genuinely reduced demand for those ventilators, and some other changes, like we discovered that continuous airflow is also an effective treatment. It meant that some of the genuinely valid and innovative designs have not been progressed, whereas others have been progressed to purchase. And I think one of the things that illustrates in this space is that tension of needs and the complexity and difficulty in running this kind of flexible procurement, and how some of it is affected by external changes. And I think some of this leads to a need to be really open between public bodies and the supply chain, so that both parties can understand their risk and share it fairly. And there are a lot of other examples, like I said, about innovation as a response to COVID. There's a lot of software developments, things like the testing system, the back end for that, so that people can access the increasing number of tests that are available, and things like information dissemination systems. So the picture with regard to controls for COVID is getting more and more complex, and there are companies, for example, working on COVID-focused chatbots for local authorities to be able to put out the complexity of that information in real time and allow people to understand what is asked of them. And then on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see that there's also this real recognition of longer-term requirements. So looking away from the next couple of months, UKRI has launched things like this competition where they're asking for innovations, any kind of innovation that touches on COVID, with development times up to 18 months. And I think that that's a real interesting approach as well. And I think that might unlock some longer term, earlier stage research. So if we go to the next slide, then very briefly I'll touch on, since a lot of the people on this call are from public bodies, although we do have a great selection of SMEs as well, but it'd be interesting to just glance at the developer side perspectives. That's where some of my experience comes from. And what you can see on this slide is the fusion of innovation model, which is a really powerful tool in terms of shaping development processes and how you go to market. And there are 5 different groups of customers that are typically used. And the numbers at the bottom show the proportion that those generally represent. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but the key difference is between the red early adopters and the green early majority. So the early adopters are visionaries who are looking at service development, service or product development based on what it could be in the future, and therefore recognize that things like value for money and business case are going to be very difficult to justify at that early stage. And that's really critical for radical innovation and the types of things that we're interested in stimulating. Whereas the early majority are somewhat more pragmatic and expect a little more, well, they expect precedence for their value to money calculations. And the critical part of this diagram is that there is a chasm between those two groups. It's so named because so many innovations fail at this point, which is typically after you've done a proof of concept and you've got the engagement of one or so customers. So I partially raise this because it's interesting to consider as a purchasing organization how your suppliers might consider you and if it's really where you would like to be seen. But I also think it's interesting to consider from this point of view how the urgency and scale of the COVID crisis perhaps pushed mindsets more into the early adopter side of things. But that in order for this to be sustained and for organisations and public bodies to really embed this change, I think that there's going to be quite a requirement for quite a critical mass of stakeholders across senior leadership, commercial and procurement, and the problem owners on the ground to really retain that kind of wider exploratory mindset. If we go to the next slide. I'll just touch very briefly. I think the point that I'll talk to here is that we're aware that they're, so relating to that previous slide, there's a lot of SBRIs and other pre-commercial procurement packages out there, which are, the UK has done a very good job of historically stimulating the market and getting people to that proof of concept. And sometimes as far as, a first contract with a public body, which is great and is a really important barrier to be breaking down. But as I said, there's a need to then dissolve further. And there are a lot of great examples. Innovate UK run a lot of those. TfL have a very good commercial innovation program where they put out problem statements and engage the market nice and early and consider their options. And there's an example I think we talked about in the report that CivTech in Scotland also do a very good job of articulating challenges for pre-commercial procurement that have a growth and export potential. So it's not a problem that just one authority or area has, but has wider application. And that hopefully should give you more ability to access that early majority in a larger market. And they also give more business support for the maturation of the operational side rather than just the product. But I do think there's also a kind of Maslow's hammer element to this, which is that SBRI is a good but systematic thing to run. And I think, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. And I think the point that CPC is really interested in exploring is how to support that, but also how to build on that and look at the other tools that can also be used in different contexts. So we do run accelerators, which talk to a similar space. So we work with a lot of large mobility and infrastructure providers across the country to do the things that you might expect in an accelerator, but so that they can own challenges for the businesses in those accelerators and make sure that they're maturing in the direction of a customer. We also have done, so we've done individual hackathons, but we're also working with some large infrastructure providers, thinking around how you can use procurement tools such as design contests to wrap around a hackathon. So a hackathon's great and can provide some really interesting and innovative and different ideas. But from the point of view of the public buyers, there's often a challenge that you get to the end of that, you've created a load of interest and interesting ideas. But then how do you build on that? How do you go to the next stage and actually continue that development? And there are some concepts around design contests and other tools where you can wrap that around a hackathon and then continue with your development and potentially procurement of the service as well. Innovation partnerships sit in that similar space. And crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, although not necessarily a procurement tool exactly, it is just there to illustrate the fact that there are, with SBRIs, the aim is often to talk to how do we become outcomes focused, how do we achieve better change for our citizens, for our companies that live in our area. And the point here is that it doesn't necessarily matter whether you're talking about a procurement tool per se, or whether you're talking about a different complementary tool to get to the same end. CPC is interested in that whole space. And so just to the final slide, I'll be very brief. I think I'm probably eating up too much time. So CPC is the challenging procurement program that we're at the beginning of the journey of, I would say. We've done some good engagement over the last few months, but I think working out the exact shape of the offering of how we can help people best and the details that sit underneath that are the important next step, and we're really keen to get engagement from everybody on that. The 4 pillars that we're currently talking around are events like this, making the case for change and getting engagement from across all stakeholders, providing some detailed support to help dissolve some of the barriers that I've discussed about complexity. There's also a need to get better data on the outcomes of innovative procurement, which we can go into later in questions if needed. And then CPC is also really focused on providing support for the supply side and SMEs as well, so that we're not just talking to one side, but both sides are on the same page. That is the end of what I'll talk about here. Look forward to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ollie. A really excellent summary of the different ways that you can approach the problem. Malcolm and I were talking before about the idea that procurement is a bit like having a golf bag, but only ever using the one club. And actually, as you've shown, there's a wide variety of tools available, and it's about using the right tool for the right task. And we're very keen to help places and buyers to understand which tools are best. Good, so some great questions coming in. Looking forward to answering those. But before, last but not least, I'm very pleased to have Matthew Kahn from the OECD, who's going to share something of a global perspective. So over to you.
Thanks, Sam. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be there. And as Oliver and Malcolm mentioned, indeed, the public sector will have a big role in supporting innovation and in mainstreaming its use in public services. Why is that? Well, first of all, because of the size of public procurement. We're talking about 12% of GDP in average in OECD countries that are channeled through public procurement, and also beyond the economic significance of public procurement. We're also talking about processes that are integrated into all public services. Think about street lighting, think about hospitals. What we have seen today, and what if there is anything that the COVID crisis would have shown, is that business as usual cannot continue. So here's the question, is indeed whether procurement of innovation will become the new normal. If you go to the next slide, well, first of all, the strategic use of public procurement is nothing new. Governments and at different levels have recognized for now quite a long time the importance and the criticality of public procurement in supporting public policies. And the OECD developed a recommendation on public procurement in 2015 that details the main pillar and the foundational pillars of a sound public procurement system, which is geared towards strategic objectives. If you go to the next slide, what we have seen in OECD countries is that almost all OECD countries have frameworks that would leverage and would allow to leverage on public procurement to support innovation. As Malcolm mentioned, the legal frameworks in almost all OECD countries certainly allow innovative procedures and to find out innovative solutions. But we have seen that beyond those legislative framework, there are also dedicated strategies that have been developed in almost all OECD countries. If you go to the next slide, we've seen indeed specific practices existing in different OECD countries, whether you have governments acting as innovation incubators, such as in Canada with the Building Canada Innovation Program, or such as the Small Business Innovation Research in Ireland. But there are also practices that are trying to align public needs with market capacity. So understanding this dialogue with the private sector and especially with SMEs to understand where is the innovation potential and how to frame public needs in a way that is conducive to innovation. If you go to the next slide, still a question remains, is why innovative solutions are not still mainstreamed in public institution and public service delivery. And what we have seen in different surveys is that countries are facing a number of challenges that prevent them to introduce and mainstream innovative procurement into public service delivery. And the first and foremost challenge is risk aversion. The concern expressed by procurement officials to have failed process, to risk not responding to public needs. And this is certainly one of the main drivers that explain why innovation is still not mainstream into public bodies. But there are also some additional elements in terms of management and coordination, in terms of capacity, and also in terms of resistance to change. And we will see later on in the discussion that to try to embed and to integrate more thoroughly innovation into public services, we need to act and we need to develop additional tools beyond legislative framework and beyond national strategies, because they already exist. If you go to the next slide, what we have tried to do at the OECD, especially in the public procurement unit, is to try to identify ways to overcome those barriers. And one effort and one initiative that is being carried out is we set up a project with the European Commission, DG Regio, to try to support a more strategic approach in public procurement, especially when it comes to the use of European structural and investment funds. And to do this, we decided to select individual concrete projects across Europe and to support those contracting and managing authorities in conducting their public procurement projects. So we have selected five initiatives, 3 in Greece, 1 in Italy, and 1 in Portugal. And we are right now providing ongoing and tailored support to those selected initiatives. One specific initiative that I wanted to briefly highlight is the initiative that is being carried out with the region of Puglia in Italy. And if you go to the next slide, where the region is trying to find out innovative solutions to address issues in terms of wastewater management. And they run a pre-commercial procurement where they tested different innovative solutions, and they assessed the opportunities and the technical viability of those solutions. But still, this remains at the research and development stage. And for those innovative solutions to be mainstream into public services, you need to transition from this pre-commercial procurement to a public procurement of innovation, which would allow large-scale deployment of solution. And what we are doing here is we are supporting this institution via the development of a risk management tool, which in fact would support the transition between those 2 different processes. And the idea is to assess not only risk, but also opportunities from that could stem from a large-scale deployment, and to check the procurement readiness of the contracting authorities. And the end goal of all this is to develop a structured support for decision-making on embarking into large-scale deployment of innovation. If you go to the next slide, you have here a quick overview of the structure of the tool. So starting with the analysis of lessons learned from the first procedures, then manage the transition risk and evaluate the transition opportunities, and then assess at the end the procurement readiness of the organization. All this is meant to support the institution throughout the transition between research and development procurement up until large-scale deployment of commercially viable solutions. But this is not only the only type of support the OECD is providing to countries. And if you go to the next slide, I also wanted to briefly mention the project we have been conducting at the OECD in the Public Governance Directorate, which again address some of the challenges that have been evidenced in previous survey, which is the question of functional silos within procurement system. And what we have done is we have set up a project, again with the European Commission, but more specifically in Slovenia, to try to use a system thinking approach to design reforms in public procurement, acknowledging for the fact that the legal framework alone is not enough, and you need to define and to co-design strategies within the procurement system that would allow to diffuse more innovative practices and more innovation. And as a result of that, we developed and we proposed the development of communities of practices and to tackle the fragmentation by creating new work processes. So there's more communication between the different stakeholders, because again, procurement officials are not operating in a vacuum. And to make sure that innovation is indeed mainstream in public services, you need to associate to this process the subject matter experts, the technical experts, but also the end users, and most of the time citizens. So all this to say that there are still ways to go to make sure that innovation indeed diffuse throughout public services. But again, the COVID crisis, and I very much agree with Malcolm and Oliver on that, the COVID crisis showed us that in times of urgent need for innovation, all these different change in mindsets and different changes in approach are functioning. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Mathieu. Lots of great research and analysis there to dig into, and I will we'll be sure to circulate all the slides and links to the report and other reading after the webinar is finished. So lots for you to dig into after the fact. Some fantastic questions have been coming up, so I think we're going to turn to a sort of period of Q&A with our remaining time. I'm going to invite Malcolm and the other speakers to turn their microphones and their videos back on.
We're here.
So one question I think stood out, I think it's good to start with, is one about culture, and it's one that we've touched on quite a lot in the initiative, the program, that this question of, so we said actually the tools are available, and the main problem is one of culture. And so I had a question here from Sarah. You know, having worked with procurement departments in local government, we're looking at making significant cultural change to achieve the kind of objective where the public sector is driving innovation in the way we've been describing. Where do we start? So I don't know whether, Malcolm, whether you want to say a few words, and then perhaps I'll say a few words about what we're doing, or what we're doing with some of our partners.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I'd certainly recommend that you read the report from the Local Government Association Working Group, if you don't mind my doing a bit of advertising there. It's on the LGA website, where we did a lot of interviews about encouraging innovation in local government procurement. But I think that, first of all, that from the very top of the organization, I think that's how you will get a more innovative organization. Because it's very difficult, and you know, Matthew identified in his slides about risk aversion. I mean, to take a risk on doing a more innovative procurement and doing things in a new way, you obviously have to have the highest level backing. And I'm pleased also to see that certainly we had a councillor, I think, who was on also asking questions, Councillor Baguin, also asking questions. So at a political level also, it will be important to communicate there. And I think case studies, this is really what we emphasize. You know, we need more data, we need more analysis, we need more good examples. We need more of a network of practice, a network of innovators, so that leaders can go and talk to other leaders, because that then helps them to overcome this barrier about risk aversion.
Fantastic, thank you. I should say that as the Catapult, we've identified the cultural challenge as one of the significant issues, and so we are using our partnership with the Society for Local Authority Chief Executives to build momentum at the executive level around confidence and creating climates and cultures in local authorities and combined with regional authorities to harness these tools. And likewise, been working very closely with our partners at the Public Sector Transformation Academy. I think some of them might be here in the virtual room, on equipping practitioners, change managers, commissioners, transformation managers, service managers in the practical tools. And we're developing new tools and new offerings in that space. So that's definitely an issue that we recognise. Mathieu, is there anything, any learning from the kind of OECD perspective on what helps drive cultural change in public procurement practice?
Yeah, well, to indeed follow up on Malcolm's point and on the question of risk aversion and how to deal with risk aversion. What we have seen is that, and based on the different country context and different projects, is not enough to try to reassure people and to simply say that it's good to take some risk. Of course, some are willing to take those risks, but as Malcolm mentioned, you need to have political willingness to do so. You need to have to accept the existence of failures. So this is something that is probably quite tricky and quite difficult to change overnight. So the approach we took with this in this concrete case in Italy is to rather take the opposite approach and to acknowledge for the fact that there were risks, and there are risks in innovative procurement, and try to understand them better and to provide tools that will support better understanding not only of risk, but also of opportunities. And we believe that this is important to assess those two dimensions hand in hand, to make sure that you do understand what it will take and how it could be beneficial to indeed embark into more innovative solutions.
Fantastic, that's great. Well, one of the aspects of culture which comes up in some other questions is one about asking the right question, setting the right challenge. I know someone said, does this come down to framing the right challenge up front? And how might we do that better? Ollie, I don't know whether you want to touch on this one to start with, in terms of the role of asking challenge identification rather than leaping to solution.
Yeah, so I think that is, in addition to the kind of culture change thing that was just touched upon, and the understanding of how you might change appetite for risk and create a desire to engage in this type of program, the next step comes down to, okay, well, how would I progress? And a lot of the tools that we're talking about are challenge-led. And the difficulty you find is that firstly, in order to build a challenge, you need to start working with the problem owner, people who are both literally the people who are on the ground experiencing that challenge, but also then their management and moving up the chain. And many times, if those people are capable and intelligent people, then their response to seeing a challenge is to formulate the solution in their mind already. And so working with them to understand the challenge, but also articulate that that's not necessarily going to be the best and most efficient way of moving forward, is the first part of influencing. But forming a really good challenge that can be engaged with by a wider market is more complex than the question would originally seem. You first of all have to articulate what the need is. You have to understand whether there are already solutions to that out there, and the maturity of those solutions, because there's little point in going through these long convoluted processes if there's something that is close to maturity in an adjacent sector, or that other customers already have access to. There's also then a process of doing something like a Moscow analysis to understand which aspects of your challenge must be addressed by this solution, which ones could and should, and which things are effectively out of scope for this challenge, because challenge makes it sound like you can do anything. And on one level you can, but there are the time cost constraints. So working through that and then articulating that in a way that suppliers who aren't already knowledgeable and comfortable with that particular problem space can understand and address. So providing enough context. There's a whole load of skills that are required to pull those out, and with some customers that's the type of activity that CPC has helped with the first few times that you go through that process. But there are other bodies as well that do this very well.
Thank you. Either the other two panelists want to comment on?
No, well, I mean, a number of people have made comments on. I'm just looking at the questions, but I mean, I think that being more ambitious in what I mean, somebody mentioned, I think, in one of the questions here about getting around the syndrome of we've always done things like that. There was always a famous phrase in IT procurement. If you bought from IBM, it was the safe solution. Well, things have changed, and again, I think somebody else asked the question. There's now a risk in not innovating because we're not actually going to meet public expectations in terms of service delivery to them. And that was something that came through very strongly in our local government report. And I think suppliers feel frustrated, and I think there's quite a few suppliers here, is that they've got great ideas which they want to pitch in. So again, I think that the public authorities, and I think particularly devolved public authorities, need to find a way of talking to innovators. I mean, how many of you actually have a gateway or a director of innovation? Whereas if I'm a supplier with a great idea, I can actually go straight away and get some engagement with you about what this can do. And that's a sort of change in mindset that I think we need to have.
That's very helpful, thank you. I'm going to stay with you, Malcolm. Sasha has asked a very helpful question about whether we have a clear enough definition of the public purpose of public procurement. Doesn't always seem very clear, he suggests, whether it's a public service or a service to government. Obviously in the cities and sort of the built environment space, it's quite contested. You know, there are assets owned by the public sector, assets owned by the private sector, things that are sort of liminal, things that are outsourced. I wonder if you've had a look at Sasha's question, whether you think we've got a clear enough articulation.
Well, I mean, I think we have an articulation in the sense that, I mean, the procurement is really only a process of actually delivering solutions. One interesting thing we came across, which is relevant here, and because I think also we had a point that was raised about potential changes to UK law. If you look at the Scottish procurement law, people who procure in Scotland are specifically asked to look at sustainability and innovation as potential criteria for what they're buying. And I think the problem is that the procurement process is seen as being a sort of legalistic, mechanistic process. But actually the challenge is to bring in from the beginning of your specification societal, environmental and other factors. I mean, the most important thing to remember about procurement is that you're not buying the cheapest solution. You're actually empowered to buy the most economically advantageous tender. And that whole definition, because we need to think about redefining economics in terms of whole life costing, about sustainability, about social criteria and other things.
Very good, thank you. So Malcolm, you asked a question about whether or not you think we are poised to harness and exploit the opportunity, and others in the questions have asked a similar one. So I suppose to frame that, you know, how might we go about using these tools to exploit the current moment and the opportunities that Innovate UK had a record 8,000, 9,000 responses to their recent call. They're drowning in, you know, in evaluations and assessments, and lots of those hopefully will be progressed. And by one means or another, we're talking to them about which of those might be, if they don't make the first cut, we can help bring forwards. But you know, we've seen a great upswell in both ambition, optimism, and creativity. How do we capitalize on that?
Do you want me to start? Well, I think first of all, I mean, as Ollie emphasised, as we said in our report, we don't have a good enough selection of case studies, and I think the first thing we have to do is to ensure that we learn from all that's been going on. So a number of people have mentioned the ventilator challenge. I happen to use that because it interests me, but I think we need to understand a lot about it and where some have been more successful or not. I want to commend the OECD, who started a process of collecting this information. And as I said, I was on a seminar this week, which is already producing valuable information. And I think one of the things that we need to encourage, and Jacqueline Homan from West Midlands, the West Midlands Combined Authority posed this question as well, is that what we're also seeing is how devolved authorities and cities and others are actually in many areas being able to innovate more quickly and are pioneering a lot of these innovative solutions than we're seeing in central government. One of the worries I think that people are having is that many of the COVID responses have been too centralized, and we haven't actually been engaging innovative minds in a devolved way. And we have to make sure that in the post-COVID solution, we have more devolution and more capabilities there. And that, I hope, will come out of doing proper case studies. So do contribute to the OECD work. And the government, in my view, needs to set up a proper data collection from that, or maybe that's something that CPC should be doing. But I mean, we'd be pleased to hear from you about that in the work that we're planning to do going forward.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, so I've got a few minutes left and too many questions to get through. So thank you for being so engaged. We will perhaps do a little write-up afterwards of any questions we don't get to, because there's lots of really interesting stuff here. So I'll try and find one final one to land us on. So any panelists have a favourite that you've seen that you've really keen to answer? Don't all jump at once.
I think, can I come back to the SME question? Because I noticed there are a number of people there, including someone who was supplying in to software to local authorities. I mean, I think there's been a lot of work done on in the digital space, because I think in the digital space that procurers are prepared to run experimental solutions. Somebody mentioned the importance of using competitive dialogue as a way of improving innovative solutions. I mean, I'm extremely surprised at how little competitive dialogue is being used, and it is a solution that's there to be used. And we don't want to get hung up necessarily on the idea that every innovation is generated by a big procurement contest, because in a way that can inhibit people. We do need to address the question, though, that somebody also raised about how people proceeding through procurement contests then get an end contract. That was something that the Innovation Procurement Partnership procedure was intended to solve. We're still at early days there. And again, we'll find out more about that. So yes, I think we'd like to go through the questions. And if you've given us a contact, I noticed that that anonymous attendees have posted questions. If you want to make yourself visible, then we can give you some answers as well.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, thank you to all of you for asking questions. As I say, we'll do a write-up of the recording will be available, but we will do a blog summarising some of the other answers we didn't get to. There's lots more information on this topic on the challenging procurement space on Medium. We'll send a link there. We're really keen to gather more of your experiences. One of the reasons we've used Medium rather than our own site is to make it easier for other people to contribute content, to write case studies, to share their experience. We're trying to build a groundswell of activity and momentum that changes the culture, that topples some of those cultural barriers, that provides you with the tools that you need to use the full range of processes that are available. Ollie suggests, as Ollie said, we're looking to create a kind of ready reckoner to help you as procurement people and those who are engaged in buying and selling innovation to understand the different routes to that. So all of that is to come. The report, if you haven't read it, is available. We'll have a survey coming out afterwards and tell us what you thought. And as the guy said, get in touch. We have an email address, challengingprocurement@cp.catapult.org.uk. So get in touch there, get in touch on Medium, and let's carry on the conversation. I will flag that we've got some other great webinars coming up in the series. So on the 13th of May is the Virtual Connections Cafe, which is targeted specifically for SMEs, but open to anyone. 20th of May, Innovation in Sustainable Food Supply Chains. We've obviously seen our supply chains, particularly our food supplies, stress tested in recent weeks and months. They've sprung back admirably, but there's huge opportunities as we continue to live a socially distanced existence for some time, to look at how those are being affected and how we make them more sustainable. So some colleagues will be sharing from that and drawing from the market. And our virtual third Thursday at the end of the month, the following day, is about digitizing the future of environmental impact assessments. So if you didn't know what that jargon was, environmental impact assessments, another part of our Plan Tech series, digitizing and upgrading the planning system for the 21st century. So register for one of those. Do sign up to Medium and get involved in the conversation there. And we look forward to speaking to you all again very soon.
Sam, can I remind you, we were going to have a quick rerun of the poll again, which is ready to go, to see whether people have been.
Oh, very good. Okay, well, there you are. If you've changed your mind, you've got 30 seconds left. Let's see whether we've inspired you more than we were already. Oh, we've lost the naysayers so far, so that's a positive move.
All right. Well,
very
I'd
good.
also say I'd be happy to any comments about our report. Please send them in, and also please copy it and make sure that your chief executive or managing director has a copy in their in tray for weekend reading. It's only 4 pages.
Very good. Well said. Well, on that note, thank you all.
Can we see the result? Ah, there it is.
Yes, sorry, yes, we are. Yeah, so moderate changes. We've swung towards the middle, I think.
Yes. Okay.
No, very good. Excellent. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.